Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the final session of day one of this really interesting summit. If I could introduce myself, I'm Robert Leckler. I'm the Provost for Health for King's College London. I look after the 4 health faculties that make up roughly half the university. Earlier this afternoon, to those of you that were here, you met my counterpart, Evelyn Welsh, who looks after the Arts and Sciences faculties. So it's a personal pleasure to introduce the Nobel laureate, Sir Paul Nurse, who will be presenting this afternoon's keynote address. Sir Paul, as many of you will know, is the Chief Executive of the Francis Crick Institute, a world-class biomedical discovery institute dedicated to understanding the fundamental biology of health and disease. And King's is proud to be a core and founding partner of the Institute, which opened last year alongside 2 other major London universities, UCL and Imperial. And of course, the core funders are the Medical Research Council, Cancer Research UK, and the Wellcome Trust. This unique set of partners helps to create powerful collaborations by bringing together the expertise, knowledge, and data of the major universities and hugely significant medical research charities to collaborate on what we think is an unprecedented scale. And the bedrock of this collaboration is the Crick Institute's strong national role in pursuing discovery without boundaries. And from my perspective, the thing that makes the Crick unique is linking one of the world's largest dedicated biomedical research centres with 3 major London universities and their academic health sciences centres and hospitals. And this creates an unprecedented opportunity to translate fundamental scientific discoveries into patient benefit. The Crick is an oasis for collaborative, multidisciplinary research, and I believe it has the potential to transform our understanding of complex diseases, deliver innovative diagnostic solutions, and help bring us innovative treatments and medicines to patients faster. Well, turning to the speaker, Sir Paul's wealth of experience across his illustrious career is a great asset to the Francis Crick Institute. He previously spent 7 years as president of the Rockefeller University in New York, and also for 5 years as president of the Royal Society, the preeminent learned society for the scientific community in this country. Sir Paul's contributions to cell biology and cancer research were recognized with a knighthood in 1999. His endeavors relating to the discovery of cell cycle regulatory molecules saw him jointly awarded the Nobel Prize in the category of physiology or medicine in 2001. And I'm eager to hear what Sir Paul has to say about his subject of choice today, the virtues of gentle anarchy in the pursuit of research excellence, and I now warmly welcome him to deliver this address.
Thank you very much, Robert. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to have been asked to speak at this summit. I want to talk this afternoon about the promotion of excellence in research. It's a topic that I covered in a report I did for the UK government called Ensuring a Successful UK Research Endeavour. And if anybody should have had the misfortune to actually have read that report, they will recognise some of the sentences that I will say. I will at the end briefly consider the Crick Institute, which Robert mentioned, and I have, if we have time, a few slides of it to show you. But first, promoting excellence in research. By the way, the virtues of gentle anarchy was not my title. Somebody here added it. I think it's not a bad one, but I can't take any credit for it if it is a good title. A major pillar for promoting excellence in research is the empowerment of the individual researcher, and as a consequence, whenever possible, to minimize top-down programmatic interference. And I think that was the reason why the subtitle, The Virtues of Gentle Anarchy, was added, because it promotes a bottom-up approach to research. Now, I want to begin with what are, for me, some principles which underlie the pursuit of high-quality research. And I'm going to start with why we do research? Well, research in all disciplines, of course all disciplines are reflected here today, including the natural and social sciences, medicine, mathematics, technologies, arts and humanities, they all produce knowledge that enhances our culture, enhances our civilization, but which can also be used for the public good. I'm a scientist and I'll focus on science today, but what I say is, in my view, relevant to all of those disciplines. Research is aimed at generating knowledge of the natural world and of ourselves, and also at developing that knowledge into useful applications, including driving innovation for sustainable, productive economic growth, including bettering public services, improving health, prosperity, and the quality of life, protecting the environment. This sort of dual nature has always been the case for science since the 17th century, when Francis Bacon, scholar, philosopher, statesman, argued that science improved learning and knowledge, which leads, to quote him, which leads to the relief of man's estate. And Robert Hooke, one of the founders of the Royal Society, also in the 17th century, who maintained that discoveries concerning motion, light, gravity in the heavens, all relevant to 17th century science, helped to improve shipping, watches and engines for trade and carriage, also relevant for the applications of science in the 17th century. However, research is not solely utilitarian. I want to emphasize that, because it generates knowledge that more generally enhances humanity through culture and through civilization. In the words of Robert Wilson, director of the Fermilab Particle Accelerator, when asked by the US Congressional Joint Committee on Atomic Energy whether the accelerator in any way involved the security of the country, the US of course, he famously replied, "It only has to do with the respect with which we regard one another, our love of culture. It has nothing to do directly with defending our country, except to make it worth defending." That's probably the most important message, and it's not mine, of my talk. I'm going to focus on the research of academics. I am an academic, principally working in universities, which of course is the topic of this summit. Now, research forms a network of discovery, science acquiring new knowledge, of translation of that knowledge into innovation, and for developments for applications. It's a complex interactive system with knowledge generated at different parts within that spectrum of activities, influencing both upstream in the creation of new discoveries and downstream in the production of new inventions and applications. New discoveries enable new inventions, but also new inventions enable new discoveries. The most effective research systems at producing knowledge for the public good are characterized by freedom of action and freedom of movement. There needs to be permeability and fluidity, allowing the ready transfer of ideas, skills, and people in all directions between the different sectors, research disciplines, different countries, and various parts of the research endeavor. Artificial barriers, which reduce permeability or mutual respect between different parts of the system, and I think Brexit is an example of such a barrier, should be resisted, as they reduce the effectiveness of the research system, both to produce knowledge and for the effective use of that knowledge. Research systems thrive on excellent scientists, research scientists, who are strongly motivated, most often by a great curiosity and by the freedom to pursue their intellectual interests. They can make a difference to our understanding of the world, whether from within a single discipline or in collaboration with others who can bring different disciplinary perspectives to bear on complex problems. Now, scientific research, wherever and however it's carried out, shares common values and common practices. It should be built on a respect for reliable and reproducible data. A skeptical approach, which challenges both orthodoxy and the researcher's own ideas, particularly the researcher's own ideas. An abhorrence of the falsification or cherry-picking of data, a commitment to the pursuit of truth. Science can only succeed when it is grounded in integrity and ethical behavior. However, despite sharing many values and many practices, there are specific differences in the ways that research is carried out in different parts of that system. Discovery research, sometimes called basic research, I don't like that term, I call it discovery research. Discovery research aims at acquiring new knowledge about the natural world and ourselves. In the natural sciences, it often proceeds through an iterative process of hypothesis generation and challenge, as has been emphasized by the philosopher Karl Popper, who spent most of his life at the LSE just a few hundred yards from here. A researcher considers what is known about the subject of interest and generates hypotheses. These hypotheses are then tested by investigating the predictions they make through experiment and observation. Should the new data obtained not support the hypothesis being tested, then that hypothesis is either rejected or modified, and new hypotheses tested by further observations and further experiments. We can generalize this to say scientific research usually proceeds by hypotheses being tested and then modified or rejected when found to be unsatisfactory. This approach, the one of Popper, is complemented by more exploratory ways of working aimed at accumulating sufficient knowledge to define a field of study and to generate hypotheses that can be tested. It's an approach that Francis Bacon tended to emphasize. Now, and this is the more important point why I considered this sort of philosophical background. As a consequence of this, the ideas driving a research study may well change during the course of its investigation. The original hypotheses can change, and even the phenomena under study may change. An important outcome is that although discovery research is efficient at producing knowledge, it's often difficult to predict exactly what knowledge is going to end up being produced, where that research is going to go. So through this mechanism of challenge and modification, the scientific process, this is the second point I want to make that's important, the scientific process, and in fact academic processes more generally, are essentially self-correcting. And it is this self-correcting characteristic, together with the application of the proper values and practices, that makes scientific research such a reliable way to gather knowledge. Now, moving to applied research, that is research very close to application. I've jumped over translation, I shall go back to that. Applied research is much more goal-directed and is aimed at achieving specific objectives and outcomes. And for this to work, you require certain conditions. The objectives for that research have to be well chosen. It requires an understanding of the potential benefits that it will produce, whether societal or commercial, so that the applications being developed by the research are truly worthwhile. And secondly, the knowledge base required for that application research has to be sufficiently well developed that effective development of that application is generally foreseeable. Therefore, research in this part of the system must be based on both knowledge of the relevant phenomena and an understanding of the societal, customer, and market or policy needs. A different emphasis, really, compared with discovery research. Going to the middle, translational research aims to bridge discovery and application research. Sometimes it's called oriented discovery research. That is, research carried out with the expectation that it will produce a base of knowledge likely to form the background to the solution of current or future problems or possibilities. The objective is essentially to expand the knowledge base in a particular area to a point where more directed development work becomes possible to lead to desired applications. However, there can be a danger with some translational activities if more directed approaches are applied too early, because that research may become less responsive to the self-corrective mechanisms crucial for scientific process, whereby the research changes direction as a consequence of new data, ideas, and hypotheses. And this will waste effort to the ultimate detriment of the long-term objectives. If the ultimate driving force is to achieve a specific objective, rather than to gain knowledge relevant for that objective, then the researcher may not respond effectively to the signals from the new knowledge being gathered, which indicates that original aim may not be achievable using that approach. In short, to rush into translation may result in becoming lost in translation. And I think that it's being clear about these different areas of research and the different issues that are involved there sometimes underpins the unfortunate discussions and disagreements between researchers in different parts of this spectrum. The aim of translational research should be to increase the knowledge base to determine what applications may be possible, whereupon more highly directed approaches can be taken. It's usually most effective to identify research objectives in a rather broadly scoped manner, giving freedom for the individual to propose a specific program within a wider umbrella, and to pursue that research wherever it may lead, because that's the only way you can be certain that you are pursuing correct knowledge. Now, it should not be thought that discovery, translational, and applied research are completely distinct. The boundaries between them can be blurred. Discoveries being made during applied research and applications emerging during discovery research can blend in different sorts of ways. Nor is it correct to view it as an unidirectional process moving from discovery through to application, because knowledge transfer occurs in all directions. What is important is that all three modes must be pursued, and pursued effectively, if the research endeavour is going to work in bringing about social benefits. We need all three. Generally, not always, but generally, discovery research activities take longer before they lead to benefits than, for example, applied research, but when they do so, they can lead to very significant benefits. I won't give you examples, I'm sure you're aware of them. Moving on, how do we decide what research to do? First thing to recognise is doing high-quality research is really hard. It's difficult to do. There needs to be a clear focus on excellence, generally best assessed by highly accomplished researchers in the relevant field. Assessment has to be made of both the researchers and the research they plan to undertake, recognising that actual outcomes may not be quite what was originally planned. Excellence is essential, and the highest standards need to be applied when judging whether research is indeed excellent. I mention that because every time I read something, I'm told this research is excellent. And I know that quite often it is not. We have to have very high standards. Now, there's three factors I want to consider here which are particularly important for research funding decisions. The researchers undertaking the research program itself, and the circumstances under which the research is to be pursued. And I'm going to discuss each of those. Let's start with who does the research. Well, research discoveries are usually associated with talented individuals who combine a number of qualities. They need to have in-depth knowledge, of course, and the necessary skills. They should be creative. They should understand the values of research, how research is done properly. They should be motivated and effective in what they do. In-depth knowledge is essential, but needs to be combined with a wider peripheral understanding of related activities, especially when a research problem requires multi- or interdisciplinary approaches. Creativity is naturally core and requires freedom of thought and action to pursue an investigation wherever it leads. A researcher who is too strongly directed or whose thoughts are restrained is unlikely to be fully effective in research. readdresses the anarchy point that was made earlier. Similarly, in my view, and I want to stress this, societies which do not encourage freedom will find it hard to excel in research. I think we should always think about that. Moving to what research activities should be tackled. Research should obviously tackle interesting problems, and the project should demonstrate both a creative and a practical approach. It's no good having a brilliant idea and having no way of actually testing it or pushing it forward. In the discovery part of the research continuum, the problem being proposed needs to have the potential for scholarly impact. I never understand when we discuss impact that we never put emphasis on scholarly impact. And that's something else I really would emphasize. And that, in my view, should be a significant part of any judgment of impact of research activities, scholarly impact. A similar approach should be used for most translational research, with the ultimate long-term aim of improving the knowledge base relevant for application for societal or commercial benefit. However, as I've already stressed, the outcome of discovery and translational research activities may turn out to be different from the original objectives, and in some cases, quite different to those that were originally proposed. Now, for research aimed at a specific application, a more directed approach is required, as I've said, and that needs to include an assessment of the needs for the customer and of the market for that research application, as well as the researcher themselves. Now to the third point, where to do the research. This issue needs to be considered in research funding decisions. It's the circumstances under which the research is being carried out. It's crucial to ensure that this research is practical to pursue in the proposed location and circumstances where it is to take place, recognizing that collaborative arrangements in different locations may also have to be involved. Centres of research excellence in specific areas help define a satisfactory local environment, but funding mechanisms should be flexible. They need to be inclusive, so that support is possible wherever quality research can take place. Sometimes, novel approaches to problems can emerge more readily when carried out away from conventional centres of excellence, because those centres of excellence can become too dominated by current fashions and established research leaders. And if you're looking for something new, it sometimes can prosper elsewhere. So how do these principles that I've been discussing apply to the Francis Crick Institute that Robert mentioned and which was opened at the end of last year? I should start by saying just a little more about what the Crick is. It's one of the largest biomedical research centres. It's located here in London. It's in a single building next to St Pancras and the British Library. It's in King's Cross. Funded by 3 research organisations, Cancer Research UK, the Medical Research Council, and the Wellcome Trust, in collaboration, as Roberts emphasised, with 3 of the great London universities, University College, Imperial, and King's. It will house, I believe, up to 1,400 researchers, it is not small, investigating the basic biology underlying human health. We will have 120 research groups. There will be no departments or divisions, back to anarchy, and about a dozen sophisticated technical cores. The lack of departments is to break down barriers, to promote collaborations, and to reduce the unhealthy competition between academic barons. You know what I mean by academic barons? You know what departmentally based universities end up with? It's like feudal wars. However, we will put in place bottom-up interest groups to promote scientific dialogue. The focus will be on youth, a training ground, early career researchers. A training ground for group leaders early on in their career who will remain at the Crick for 12 years, and then the Crick will help place them elsewhere to develop their careers just as they are motoring into senior positions. We will not hang on to people. And we'll do that with a startup package, which is curious. I mean, in the US, they'd think we were crazy. we give them a startup package to go somewhere else. But it fulfills our mission of helping to inhabit the whole biomedical research endeavour. About 2/3 of the group leaders ultimately will be of this type, with a third more senior white-haired individuals like me providing mentoring advice and all the other rather boring stuff that we all have to do that you're very familiar with in this audience. The vision for the Crick is based on carrying out discovery research, but also being very open to translation, because that's important for us. Its values will be being bold, imaginative, open, dynamic, and collegial. It is not a value to do risky research. I get tired of people saying they want to promote risky research. We do not do research which is risky. That's no virtue at all. We do research which is bold. There may be a risk element in it, but I'd rather do bold research without any risk if I can. I just emphasize that because this word risk is permeated everywhere, and it is a pure nonsense, in my view. There are 5 strategic priorities. Pursuit of discovery without boundaries, ambitious research on important questions, and emphasis on multidisciplinarity, on no boundaries between programs or clinical and commercial activities, and on high standards of scientific behavior. Creating future leaders of science, following a best athlete approach, the best person, emphasizing excellence, taking account of new scientific developments from around the world, providing a pipeline of new recruits to other academic institutions, collaborating creatively, particularly with our founder universities, to encourage that multidisciplinary agenda, accelerating translation for health and wealth, making translation a valued activity, and establishing links with industry, making it easy for them to exploit Crick discoveries. I don't see these activities as a role for the Crick to make money. I see it as a role for others to make money based on what we do. Finally, engaging and inspiring the public, a commitment to an open culture, generating interest and excitement in science through outreach in schools and society as a whole. These strategies are being pursued in a new building, and I'm going to show you a few pictures if I haven't overrun my time. Robert can just tell me if I have, that promote interactions, that break down boundaries and inspires those who work there. Have I time to show a few pictures, Robert? Okay. First thing is, you must note the dynamic logo. Watch, this is the most interesting slide. Look at that. Look at it, look at it, look at it. Bang, okay. Right, so this is the Crick. It was taken a few weeks ago. You'll see it's a large building which responds to the St Pancras station with its roof. And this is where we will have 1,400 researchers and about 400 support staff under that single roof. This is we applied to the Wellcome Trust, to their art department, to get money for this sculpture by Conrad Shawcross. This sculpture is called Paradigm. It's, I think, about 14 meters high, but the base of it is only about 3/4 of a meter. Now, why am I emphasizing that? Because it's a conceptual piece of art, it's a paradigm, something, an idea, a piece of knowledge starts small, it grows and it gets bigger, and you put extra knowledge on top till it becomes much more substantial. But you could imagine, because there's a certain insecurity about it, that if you put another fact on top, it could all fall over. And that's what we have to think about in the knowledge endeavour, that knowledge is tentative, and we have to always recognise that. That's outside the building. This is just a corner of it. We've got some public square there. This is the opening, and it shows the inside of that building, showing the atrium. That lecture theatre there will seat or accommodate around 500 individuals. This is looking up into the walkways that go across that building. It is rather grand, must be said. Looking up the staircase. We have a spiral staircase in the middle, so that everybody just doesn't disappear into the elevators. They are seen visibly from across. This was the Queen opening it. You see Ed over there. You've seen Ed already. So Ed's standing there, looking down on the Queen, as you can see. The Queen herself is astonished by the building that she's just walked into, as we all are, by the way. This is my lab, actually. So these are my students that you see here. And it's across the atrium. And the point, what I wanted is for people to come out of the lab area and look and see another dozen labs. So they don't feel isolated. Like, you know, most academic institution runs in corridors, lots of boxes, completely opposite. I think some people get a bit nervous about the glass. You know, they can't do their crossword or, you know, do their nails or, you know, whatever during the course of their activities, or, you know, try and look at the local football or whatever, because they're constantly on exposure. I probably said some politically incorrect things there, so just delete that. Okay. I said we're involved in public engagement. This was our opening public lecture. David Attenborough came there. A fantastic talk. This is our schools program, and this is the end of my talk. Thank you very much.
Well, Paul, thank you very much. You've covered a huge range of the philosophy of science and research there, and we've got 10 minutes, I think 12 minutes left for some open discussion before we round off the day. So there are 3 roving microphones. Please raise your hand if you'd like to put a question to Paul. There's one down here at the front. Just while the microphone's coming, Paul, could I just ask you to comment? This is a time, I think, of almost unprecedented turbulence in UK research organisation, with the results of the Nurse Review, indeed, with the implications of Brexit and everything else. If you were put in total charge of the research purse, do you think that we've got the balance of funding roughly right in the UK in terms of the continuum we've described, or do you think it needs some adjustment?
You know, you're asking what is really one of the very difficult questions, which is, and I don't have a good answer to it, frankly. I'm often asked, you know, what is appropriate for discovery, translation, applied research? I don't think there's one glove that fits all. I do think it varies from area to area, and frankly, and it's a cop-out what I'm going to say, I think you just have to discuss with those that understand the areas and see what looks right. What I'm sure is too much emphasis on one of those areas at the expense of others in the long run will be wrong. So I don't have a good answer for it, but I think talking about it is probably the only way forward.
Would you like to introduce yourself before you ask your question?
Sure. Thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Francisco Cantú, Tecnológico de Monterrey, Mexico. So question is, scientific research is great, especially experimental one, and is responsible for the technology developments that we have nowadays and the knowledge economy and the like. However, scientific research has its own limitations. As Karl Popper points out, falsification is a method through which every discovery in the scientific area is true until it is falsified by experimentation. So question is, what are the alternative sources of knowledge beyond experimental research that would allow us as humanity and as social beings to keep to keep doing progress more than about the limitations that scientific discovery has on its own.
Mm. So. Well, I think that the first point to emphasize is that experiment and observation is critical for scientific advance. So we do have to build what we think and our ideas on data, on observation, on experiment. So they are critical. I emphasize the power of hypothesis generation and testing because it is pretty rigorous, but you'll notice I also added a second approach of a more broad observational one. I mentioned it in terms of Bacon, because there are some areas which are not yet in such a mature state that they can be subject to strict hypothesis. And indeed, I get tired in grant-giving committees when individuals say there's no hypothesis being tested here, which often will end up, if that is followed critically, in only supporting research which is already partly understood, and that may be the point that you're trying to make. We do have to be open to more exploratory and observational ways of working. My own laboratory works somewhat like that, although we rather rapidly move to hypothesis, but often start in that sort of observational sort of way. You may also have been thinking of what do we do when we are asked for judgments about which have a scientific perspective when our knowledge base is weak, which can be another issue here. And the answer there is that we can only just do our best, but we have to be very careful that we don't fall into the trap where if a politician wants advice, for example, on whether this epidemic is going to turn out into a pandemic, we have to be honest and straightforward that perhaps we don't know, it could be this, it could be that, because sometimes science and scientists project the idea that everything they know is chiseled in stone. And that's because we're taught that way in school. You know, we're taught Newton's laws of physics that's been tested for 300 plus years. Yet the sort of thing I do is tentative, it's often wrong, and when we're asked to advise on it, we just have to say that. What we don't want is when politicians and other policymakers say, the scientists say, as if then it's the truth. We have to be humble and accept that sometimes the scientists don't know, we can just guess. I maybe have skirted but I think it's in the area you asked.
Any other questions from the audience? Gosh, well, I'll give you, yeah, lady here. Again, if you could introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Sue Cunningham from CASE, the Council for Advancement and Supportive Education. And seeing your images at the end, the building looks truly magnificent. Congratulations. And you talked a bit about your engagement programs. What are you doing to interpret and create understanding in the community around you about the work that's going on in the new institute?
Thank you for asking that question, because engagement is pretty high on our agenda. That large research building, the front part of it is completely open to the public. We have an exhibition area, we have a coffee bar open to the public just outside St Pancras Station, and we have a very major, for such a relatively small activity, given we're not a university, we probably will reach 25,000 school children this year, for example. We already reached 7,000 last year before we even opened. So we are very strongly committed to engagement, because if scientists can't convince society that science is worth doing, then we will lose our license to operate. That was a term used by a House of Lords report about 15 years ago. We have to engage with the public, at least those that are any good at engaging with the public. I think it's a mistake to put all scientists out there, because some of them I wouldn't let near the public. But I think that we really should do our best when we have good people, and I really protect and defend those scientists who are quite good at it. I haven't yet sorted out how much we should do at higher level engagement, like politicians and so on, because it may be that universities are wider, with their wider interests, would be better placed for doing that. With the local community, because we are on two sides of our building, we have public buildings, St Pancras and the British Library, two sides, part of the poorest part of London. And we have built a community centre at the other end of the building, a well-living centre, and we engage with the local community a lot through that as well. And I'm a patron of the local primary school, for example. And finally, we have a teaching lab in the institution which is aimed at primary school children, not secondary, aged 6 through to 11, because that's where there's a great weakness in provision. I think NYU had a question over there.
Andy. Is there a microphone?
He's got a loud voice, I can tell you.
I do have a light. Paul, thank you for your comments, and I, for one, found your description of the research enterprise a very compelling one. The use of anarchy as a desirable state of affairs. But it sounded awfully to me like most universities that I've been familiar with, and it's been my experience that as the university becomes more distinguished, it becomes more anarchic in its structure and in the way in which ideas, universities that you're familiar with, but also, that aspect in the way in which British funding policy is heading would seem to be moving in the opposite direction. And certainly in the last few years, there's been a centralization of the research councils, as you know. There's been a more stronger imposition of industrial policy and industrial priorities in determining funding amounts and areas, and even to the extent of putting a significant amount of the authority and power into the hands of a single person. These would seem to be decisions, some of them coming as a result of the Nurse report, that would be moving in the opposite direction from the one which you so eloquently laid out for us this afternoon. And, you'd criticize universities, but in fact, most departmental barons that I've encountered in my life have had no higher purpose in life than to encourage the careers of their younger colleagues, very much as you've been describing for the Crick Institute. So a comment on how, am I wrong in my understanding of the way British research funding policy is going away from the anarchy that we all desire?
Well, you've obviously had better experience of barons than I have had, but we'll pass over. And in Oxford too. Come on, give me a break. Right. So I do disagree with you over the issue, and I'm bound to say that because I proposed coming together. However, so I want to be, and many people have said what you've said, so I understand that clearly it's possible to interpret it in the way you've said. The first thing is that the research councils, we have a number of research councils for those that come from elsewhere, around 7, have worked really well, I think, with the face with the community. They did not work well in the face with government, and they had little impact with government, and that was a major weakness. You only have to look at our percentage GDP spend on research for the last decade and a half to see that we had no impact at all. And I think you just have to recognize that it didn't work. Now, what I wanted to put in place was a grouping, a body with the strength to deal with government. And so everything depends exactly on that. And we could go the way you said, but if we have strong people there, including from the academic community, which is what I argued for, then we will be in a much stronger position to defend the research councils, rather than, as we were in before, they were all being picked off one at a time by the civil servants and by those giving them all these different tasks to do. So I think we need strength there to protect the anarchy. And if you don't have strength to protect the anarchy, it can be taken off. And so I do disagree for that reason. And I think it is actually critical that we have the right people there who will deliver it, because it could go wrong. But if we have the right people, it won't go wrong.
Well, a brief one. Our time is up, so I'm sorry. This will be a final brief question. Just wait for the microphone, if you would.
Yeah. Sir Paul, my observation is that last 10 years and recently, Imperial College, UCL, and lastly, King's College moving towards business degree rather than science and engineering. Is it not a commercial decision or ethical decision?
Well, I'm not commenting on my 3 bosses here, or 3 of my 6 bosses. I think this is another subtle point that you need to be clear about. Producing knowledge is a societal good, and we shouldn't lose sight of it. The way in which you generate that knowledge is, in my view, driven best by this anarchic approach, this freedom approach. But it has to be harnessed and managed properly to get societal good. If we lose the ultimate aim of societal good, which you heard I said can be to improve culture and civilization, but also societal goods, and notice I'm not just saying commercial, societal goods is across the board. We have to do that to justify the large sums of money that are spent on us for these activities. Because why should, you see, what we're trying to do is persuade the public to indulge people like me just to follow my curiosity. Now, you can't just say that. That happens to be the most effective way to produce the knowledge, but it has to have a second chapter, and the second chapter is to capture that knowledge for societal and commercial good. Now, the universities can sometimes talk too much about commercial activities. I think they do. I think they should be cleverer about this in thinking about societal goods. They should be cleverer in identifying that you give freedom to individuals and then you set it up right. And sometimes there's too much emphasis on this sort of naked commercialization. By the way, sophisticated politicians understand it. I had a lot to do with our finance minister, George Osborne, before. He completely got that. He didn't put more money in, though, I have to say, but at least he completely got it. Or at least he told me he completely got it. But that's what we will try and get through this unified thing. So we shouldn't say commercial things are bad, or even that the university should be interested in it, but it has to be considered in this rather more complex, sophisticated, and nuanced way. Which means it could go wrong, which Andy was saying, but let's be optimistic. Let's just make it work.
On that positive note, I think we have to draw this to a close. I know there are more questions. Paul, can I thank you very much for stimulating our thinking.